I'm Dave Bryant. As part of our third Thursday series, we're trying to get as many of the Ornette Coleman primetime sidemen in as we can. And each time we do, we're going to try to have a little bit of a oral history chat with them, try to get some interesting things down on the record. And so today, we have as our guest Kenny Wessel, the nicest man in show business on the most miserable day of the year. So funny how those things work out. So Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you. Don't get to see you often enough.
I'm glad, and I'm glad you didn't introduce me as the most miserable man in show business on the nicest day in Cambridge.
I always get those mixed up. But no, we would have done another take. So I just want to start off by, I know you actually went through an audition process with Ornette. And so where were you in life, when you got the call, and tell us about the audition, and just start off with that.
Okay, I was, I guess, in my late 20s, early 30s. I was living in New York City. I had been working professionally, and I had also gone back and gotten a master's at the Manhattan School of Music. And one of my good friends, who was a neighbor and also worked at the Manhattan School, and we became very good friends, was guitarist Chris Rosenberg. And Chris had been recommended to Ornette by Justin DiCioccio, who actually, I think, found quite a number of Ornette's sidemen or recommended a bunch of different people like Al McDowell and I think Chris Walker, a couple of different people. But I'm not sure about Chris, but I know Al and some other people were recommended through Justin.
And who was he, Justin?
Justin DiCioccio actually was an educator, drummer and educator at LaGuardia School for the Arts. And a lot of great musicians came through there, and they were friends, Ornette and Justin. And then Justin went on to head up the Manhattan School of Music.
Oh, okay.
So great educator, good guy. Anyway, Chris had done an audition with Ornette, and Ornette had asked Chris at the end of the audition if he knew another guitarist. He was looking for a second guitarist in the band and somebody who could play a bunch of different styles, rock, jazz, blues. I think Chris was recommended because Ornette was looking for someone who could play jazz and also classical music, and Chris was very good at both of those. So Chris recommended me and called me and told me that Ornette was going to contact me, and of course that was in the days of answering machines. So I still have the tape somewhere with Ornette's voice on it, saying, Kenny, I'd like you to come to my studio to meet me and play a little bit. Anyway, I was totally excited and blown away, and so it was an audition. I don't know if it was really, it wasn't formal and it wasn't informal. It was just somewhere in between. I went to the studio. It was up in Harlem, around 120. Well, that was when it was on Fifth Avenue.
And excuse me if I can just interject. Were you doing at this time a duet gig sometime with Chris?
Yes, we had been playing. We had actually been playing sort of weekly or bi-weekly, just together. We would make breakfast or brunch and play all day. And he lived around the corner from me, so okay. And we did some gigs together too, but mostly just sort of had this musical and personal friendship. So I remember walking into the studio the first day, and there was Al McDowell and Chris Walker on bass, Donato on drums, Badal Roy on tablas, Chris and me, and Ornette. And I had known of Badal from my interest in John McLaughlin and My Goals Beyond, and then Miles Davis, the group that Badal was in with Miles. So I was a big fan of Badal's. And So in addition to meeting Ornette, Badal was sort of a hero. And then I walk into this sort of, bizarro universe with two bass players who were much more virtuosic than any guitar players I ever knew. It was sort of upside down world, because Chris and I are not the most, Chris is a great guitarist, but we're not particularly virtuosic or speedy. But Al and Chris could sort of do anything. Al McDowell and funky as hell. So it was just sort of an interesting experience. And we played for hours. Ornette had some charts, and we just played. At the end of the day, he said, that's good. Can you come tomorrow? And I said, sure, I'll come tomorrow. So I came the next day. Same thing, although there may have been a couple of other people. Maybe there was a different drummer, another guitarist, people I didn't know, some people I did recognize. So there was some kind of audition process going on. And this went on for a while, like a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. He said, come back. And I was sort of consistently being asked to come back, but there were different people, even though the core of Al and Chris were the same. So Chris Rosenberg and I were certainly talking a lot, and at one point he said, man, we're going to Europe in a couple of weeks. I said, oh, wow. I wonder if I'm going. I had no idea. No one had talked to me about anything. So I finally said to Donardo after one afternoon, I said, Donardo, I'm really enjoying playing with the group and making music with your dad, but I know Chris said that you guys are going to Europe. Should I be making any plans? Should I get my passport together? Whatever I was. And Donardo goes, oh yeah, you're in the band. My dad likes your playing. Yeah, you're in the band. So I always thought, if I hadn't asked that question, I wonder if I would have been in the band.
Squeaky wheel got the grease.
So it was sort of an interesting, very indeterminate type of experience.
So at this point, what did you know of Ornette's music as a listener coming in, and what kind of preconceptions might you have had, and just what were your ideas going in about his music before you had any personal experience of it?
I wasn't. I knew Ornette's, some of his early records, Shape of Jazz to Come, a couple of the early things, and I didn't know much about Primetime at all. I had never seen them. I don't think I had heard the band. I knew about Ornette from sort of a jazz history context, that he had sort of made these strides and revolutionary movements in the music and changes. But I wasn't a student of his music, so but I had done a lot of sort of experimental playing and free playing with colleagues sort of growing up, and I sort of felt that at least prepared me for at least the experience of playing with Ornette. I think if I had just been doing standards gigs or straight ahead gigs, I would have been more lost than I was. And I certainly it took quite a while for me to find my way in the music, like what to do, how to do it, what I shouldn't do, or what I didn't think to, so that was a process that really lasted my whole experience in the band. And I think I did sort of make a number of realizations and leaps in playing the music and at least understanding the music from my point of view. But
did anything in particular surprise you? Like, I thought it was going to be like this, but it turned out to be like that.
Yeah. yes. Yeah, and there was lots of things. I mean, I'm not sure what I thought it was going to be like. I didn't really have any expectations, but there were certain things that were very, I'm not saying, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but hard to get my head around. Like, one of the things is this idea that Ornette was very comfortable with things happening simultaneously that were working against each other. A beautiful melody, ballad, beautiful melody, and then a funky bass part and a scrunchy guitar thing in another key, and some very angular, harsh type of sonic environment going against this beautiful ballad. And I always felt that, there should be some kind of agreement in a musical situation that, okay, it's a beautiful melody, you sort of support that with appropriate harmonies or textures. And Ornette was very comfortable and also was very encouraging to sort of come up with different or have things working against each other.
Yeah, I always felt that I could feel my powers of perception expanding because I didn't have any choice. It just felt like that constant onslaught of all that information, and there's just something, the natural human tendency to want to find some order in it, project some pattern onto it, something like that, but it's just like it was sink or swim, and I had to make sense of it.
Right, and he would, always encourage us, no, I want you to play in this key, or, don't play in my unison, find another. And I remember, I've said this before about Ornette, but, at one point he said that, I might have asked him, well, Ornette, the melody is so beautiful, why do you want me to play that, And he said, well, why, when you're walking down the street in New York, you can see a couple holding hands and then a baby crying and the taxi driver yelling at somebody and construction workers, whatever. You could see all these things in the space of your viewpoint. He said, why can't music be like that? And it's true. It is life, and but that was very difficult to get my head around at first. And I always think, I'm not sure, I know you sort of helped me when in different ways understanding Ornette and some of his viewpoints, because you had spent so much time with Ornette before you joined the band, and then and after.
It may have been a discordant influence.
But I forgot what I was going to say. But just the idea that things can happen against each other.
Right. I was going to ask you about both specific experiences playing with him, and then also experiences of him as a human being. And I thought, I wonder which one I want to ask first. And then I thought, it's hard to separate the two.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, and I wouldn't separate the two at all, because his music was very much like his personality, or he was a very unique individual. He was some ways incredibly open. He would surround himself, or would be surrounded by all sorts of people. The studio would be, there might be a famous poet sitting there, a guy that he met on the street who was sort of living on the street, who Ornette might have found had some really interesting ideas about something, you know, music or architecture, and then there'd be, you know, a scientist or a philosopher. You know, there was always this real cross-section of personalities and viewpoints, and Ornette saw everybody as equal. There was no like hierarchy of like, well, this guy's famous, so you should check him out. So Ornette would like say, you should talk to this guy, and I realized, well, that guy I've seen him on the street, like sleeping on the gutter, you know. No, you should talk to this guy. He's got some really interesting ideas about, you know, whatever.
And after a while, you realized it was true.
It was true. It was true. I remember the guy that traveled with us who, I can't remember his name, the guy who did the Shakespeare.
I was just telling somebody else about him the other day, George Kovacs.
Yeah, this guy, what was his, I can't remember because it was so interesting what he...
Yes, that should be the subject of a different interview. But perhaps beyond our purview at the present moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting bunch of people. And what was really interesting, I found out later, that of course I would have known anyway, but after Ornette passed and people were sort of comparing notes and all these people from different walks of life and backgrounds, and you realized as they reminisced about him that all of us knew exactly the same person. And so he never ever changed and just had this capacity to have special, close relationships with people that, you know, when we'd go to Finland, and it'd be like, oh, yes, these people, I met them 20, 30 years ago. And they'd come on like they were his best friends in the world, and they took us in. You know, it was that kind of thing.
And the music, in answer to your other part of your question, the music or him as a musician was the same way.
Yes.
I mean, he would play with anybody and anything and, you know, find the validity or the music there. And the inspiration, like it was open to all that. You know, there was another aspect of him that was sort of like his brilliance. I mean, his mind was so quick, and he was a brilliant man.
And funny.
Hilarious. I have to. There's so many stories I have, but he was quick. He was quick.
Yes.
The one that comes to mind, right? There are a couple of them that come, but one he met my wife, and the first time he met my wife Diana, and he said, "Oh, are you a musician?" And she said, "No, I'm an anthropologist." He goes, "Oh, you play the world." But he would always have just like music too. He would tell you that something that you know is actually something was something else. A half step is a minor third, or a whole step is a flat fifth. He would explain it to you. And the same way, he would come in the morning and say something about the news. He'd say, you know, that senator did this, well, that reminds me of this. And he would put something together that was totally unrelated. And you're thinking to yourself, how could he put those two way out things together, just like a half step and a minor third? It was his mind made these incredible sort of non-linear connections, and they made sense. Yeah. It was sort of like you were tripping talking to Ornette sometimes, like, whoa, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, wait, there is a connection. How does that, work?
And after a while, you realize it's not like he practiced that line in his room the night before and thought, I'm gonna blow everybody's mind tomorrow. No. It's like off the cuff, all day, all night, every day.
Yeah. No, he was incredible.
My other favorite story I remember you telling. Now I'm taking a chance here, folks, because if he doesn't remember the story, we're gonna have to cut this. But remember when he broke his wrist, and you asked him about if he could still work the octave key with his stuff.
I don't remember the story.
You don't remember the story? All right, we're going to leave this in because I'm going to tell Kenny's story.
Please tell the
So
story.
it's not as good as Kenny would tell it. But he'd broken his wrist or something here and had some thing, and so he had a cast on. And he was rehearsing with, I think, another group or something like that, and you had gone to the rehearsal. and you told me afterwards, you were like, "Oh, Ornette, how are you? Are you able to play okay? Are you able to work the octave key okay with your thumb?" And he says, "Oh yeah," he said, "that's what separates us from the animals." You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember one day he came in with the C melody sax. You know, someone had given him a white gold-plated C melody sax, and you know, Ornette was always talking about transposition and how that was, you know, the guitar was in this key and the piano in this key and the bass, and the alto you have to transpose here, and it's really complicated. And I said, Ornette, you know, you get a C melody sax, you're cool. You don't have to worry about transposing anymore. And he goes, "Oh no, this is hard. This is much more stressed out. I got to transpose to where I was, and now and then again back to where I'm supposed to be." Or it was something like that. You have to transpose twice now because you got the. So it's like, okay, Ornette, you got.
That's right. In saxophone land, a C is a transposing key, right?
Yeah.
So it makes total sense when you think of it that way.
Yeah.
You know, later in life, because I thought it's one of these things where you learn it too late with your parents, teachers, all kinds of situations in life. And I realized this is after the band wasn't playing anymore. But when I'd visit him, I was starting to learn how to ask better questions of him. Because a lot of times it's sort of like how you phrase it, what the vibe is in the room, the tone of voice, mood everybody's in, exactly the context of the situation you're in musically, what came before in the conversation, all that. And I remember I asked him about the thing. Oh, he was saying that there was, in harmolodic, there was, for each term we used in harmolodics, there was a word in traditional language and traditional musical nomenclature that meant the same thing. And I said, oh, okay. So like for the clefs, the way you talk about the clefs, what is that called in traditional musical nomenclature? And he said, oh, range. Like, dummy. You know, like, of course, why wouldn't you get that? You know, and it was like, oh, well, of course, that's so simple now. But it's like, you know, you at first, it was the way he spoke about the clefs was so mysterious, almost like the astrological signs of the instruments. It had something to do with the personality of the instrument, you know, almost. But it's like that. But then you think about the range of an instrument. You think about, you know, when ironically you have like, you'll hear somebody play Flight of the Bumblebee on the tuba or something like that, and you realize that that's this, you know, crossing instrumental range stereotypes, and you say, oh, well, range is really a heavy thing. Yeah. And so, okay, so this is where we're coming from here. All right.
I had a similar experience to that. It was after prime time had sort of finished, or my tenor in prime time had finished. I would still go visit him, and I remember one time I went in there and said, okay, I'm going to get this, what key the guitar is in, bass in, I'm going to get that, you know, figure that out, because, you know, I'm sort of still wrestling with that. So I said, Ornette, what key is the guitar in? Because sometimes he would say E, and sometimes he would say another key, and so he said, well, what are your strings? What are your open strings? So I mentioned them, E, A, D, G, B, E. He goes, D flat. Said, and he had never said that before to me, but he said D flat, and I said, well, what does that have to do with my open strings? He goes, those are all the notes that are not in D flat. Your open strings are all the notes that are not in D flat. He says, if you understood that, you would figure out the guitar. You would be, and I'm, you know, but it was instantaneous, and it wasn't like he knew the open strings. He said, what are the open strings? And oh, D flat. So, and it's interesting because I hadn't any particular relationship with D flat up to that point, but I've talked to string players who said that there is something sort of mystical about D flat, and it has to do with the overtone series and the fact that the fundamental is not in that key, you know. So he's on to something there, but.
Well, you know, I think it's on the liner notes for the Ornette on Tenor record, he talks about playing D-flat blues on the tenor. And I asked him about that once. And he goes, oh, yeah, that's right. But he said, but only on the tenor. And the reason I asked him was because, we were doing, I think the tune OAC was a D-flat blues.
Right.
And so there was something about the D-flat blues that was had a certain mojo happening for him.
Yeah. But, he was also incredibly generous, incredibly, giving with his musical information and ideas, and would give you things, possessions, things, guitars, whatever. He was very generous musically and as a person. And so, in fact, sometimes so generous that I was like, I don't think I want to sit next to Ornette on the plane because I want to watch the movie. I don't want to talk about intervals for 4 hours.
But if you do, you have someplace to go, right?
Yeah. Because he was always, I remember,
I mean, that's the thing. I don't have anybody to talk about intervals with anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of the thing.
Yeah. But yeah, he was a very special sort of individual, and really, I think he had a big effect on me, both musically and personally. I think in ways that I'm still not totally sure about, but some ways just opening up my concepts of music, the idea that things can coexist that are not necessarily related or in the same key or whatever. The idea that you can always look at one piece of information from a bunch of different sides. So Ornette was always taking the simple elements of music, triads, major scales, intervals, and sort of looking at them from all these different perspectives and finding different relationships and different ways to put them together. And I think that sort of has opened up my very linear approach to reality and music. I was, much more, I'm a much more anal, sort of organized person, and Ornette was very non-linear. There was never like a straight line between 2 points. He was always going a different way, which could be very frustrating hanging out with him, especially if you had someplace to go. It's like, okay, we're not getting any closer than what we're supposed to do. But it was sort of beautiful to be around that kind of energy and that mind. It was very...
Every moment was another opportunity to make a creative decision. Yeah. What are we having for lunch? You don't have to order off the menu. It was like that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, and he sort of believed in me, I think. At one point I remember him saying, you need to make a record, or you need to start a band. And he also said early on that I was, you're playing roadmaps. You're playing what you know how to play. He says, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear what you don't know. He said, you have much more music in you that you're not getting at. And, at the time I was like, I think I was challenged and scared. Like, he wants me to play stuff I don't know. How do I know if it's going to sound good? But he trusted that everybody had a voice, and I don't think it was, anything special about me. I think he just was very encouraging to find your own voice. I remember that I asked him to sign a program for one particular concert that we played, and it was play yourself, be happy, Ornette.
I remember him saying to you once, Kenny, you're a very well-mannered person. And you could tell the way he said it, it was like, I respect that. You know what I mean? And I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Other thing I wanted to ask you about, our good friend Bottle Roy, who I would love to have had be part of the series. And I know that you played in different musical situations with him. You were close with his family, got to spend a lot of quality time with him. And well, the three of us non-smokers in the band used to hang out on the road, but I know you got a lot of extra quality time with him. So yeah, just since we won't get a chance to talk to him in person, anything you can share?
Oh man, that's a whole other interview. But you know, Badal was just a beautiful soul. Talk about a generous person. I mean, he would give the shirt off his back, and he was so welcoming to me from the first day we met. I mean, we were up in Harlem at this rehearsal studio, and Badal, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. I sort of lived up near there, and so he said, would you walk me to whatever, because I don't really know the neighborhood. And really from there, he introduced me to his family, to Indian culture, to all sorts of musicians. He brought me around the world with him. We did a lot of hanging in the band together. We'd go out to dinner, and Badal always, you know, had the eye for the good restaurant, or would meet someone on the plane and know where to go, or they would take us out or something like that. And Badal, you know, he was, you know, Primetime was, I guess this is my take on it, but Primetime was a difficult band for everyone in a certain respect, because it was a dense, crowded ensemble with a lot of brilliant musicians playing. And Badal, there was always a question of, can I get heard? Because the tabla is not a particularly loud instrument. And we all had that in our, you know, particular, well, I wonder if I'm being heard in the mix, or if this is what I'm playing is making, you know, any effect on things. But, and a lot of times in the rehearsals, rhythm wasn't dealt with as much as melody and harmony. So Badal and Donardo could be sitting for a long time without playing. But Badal was always, you know, he was just so happy to play music, you know, and happy to be with people. You know, he would just light up. He would light up when people came in the room, and he would light up the room when he came in.
And despite his concern, he always projected.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like his presence was always, you would think he would get overrun in that onslaught,
right.
but he always held his own.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Just had a presence.
But yeah, he was a good friend, and I miss him.
I know one time when he stayed at our house and he got on the computer and got on Facebook, and when he did, all of a sudden those little, you know, messenger windows that come up if somebody sends you a message, a bunch of them just started popping up on the screen all at once, and it was like from all over the world, you know, places like that. And he's looking, he's kind of like trying to look between them to see whatever it is he's trying to find. And then so before, and before he logs out, he just picks one at random and kind of answers, "Yeah, how you doing?" And then, you know, signs off. Yeah. But it was amazing just to see that was kind of a strange sign of a life well lived and all these connections made. But
Badal, you know, you remember he would go on a plane, and like after we get off the plane, he'd have a dinner invitation. You know, because, oh, this is my friend. You know, I met him he was sitting across the aisle from me, you know. So he would, yeah. I remember
going with him to the Indian restaurants too. He'd order for us. That was quite an.
Find out where the cook was from, and, you know, order accordingly.
Yeah, I remember that one time he couldn't. It was like in Germany. We went to an Indian restaurant. He couldn't make any headway, and they're like, "What's up?" And he said, "I don't know. I've tried 7 different dialects, and, you know, I'm not getting any response." And finally, the guy comes back, and they communicate some kind of way, and the waiter walks off again. And he turns to us and says, "He's Iranian."
Yeah. Badal, another one who was very funny.
you know.
Oh, yeah, yes, indeed.
Beauty is flesh neatly arranged on an ever-living skeleton.
All right, I actually sent him a note about that once, and he wrote back and says, "You are right."
And something that I think all of us are dealing with as we age. Badal was always saying, it's not how old you are, it's how you are old. I always use that with my, the birthdays add up.
Yes.
So,
On that bleak note, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to sign off here. Thanks for
We could talk all day.
Well, you know, we have, but guys, it's horrible because I feel like I'm interrogating here. Where were you on the night of? You know, 'cause we're both sitting here perspiring. But anyway, thank you so much. And
Great you're doing this, Dave.
you
It's
other
great.
cats in the band, we're coming for you. All right.